Welcome to the Original Intelligence Podcast, where in every episode we talk about what it takes to live a natural life, to live in conjunction with that which is all of yourself as opposed to just part of yourself, and to be able to connect truth where truth can be connected. Today, I'd like to talk about something that a lot of people are giving a little bit of information around, but we're not really getting the full picture. And I certainly can't give the full picture, but I'd like to give a little bit of a perspective shift on something that is so important in this day and age, especially in our conversations that we're having publicly. And that has to do with the difference between that has to do with the immune system. You know, what I want to try to do here today, and it doesn't have to be a very long process, is just to get ourselves thinking a little bit differently around this notion of the body as this vehicle that is so vulnerable and requires, all these protections and things like that to create something called immunity. We've got this germ theory where it suggests that we're always being attacked or we're always at war, you see. Well, the problem with that is that it's not found anywhere else in nature. Not in the same way that we're sort of observing it. Yes, in nature there are warring factions, like for instance ants. Ants from one area, from another area, kind of come together and they start kind of intermingling in ways that kind of looks like a battle, may very well be a battle, and there's lots of this in nature. But when it comes down to immunity in this body, there's a lot more subtlety than we're giving our bodies credit for. And this is especially true since we sort of unlocked the understanding of the microbiome in the early 2000s. Before that, we were in this concept that, everything is pretty linear in the body and that, causality goes from one spot to another spot in a very, cohesive and predictable manner. But we now see that it's not really so. And there's a lot more going on there than what meets the eye. And so this term immunity is what I want to kind of play around with a little bit with you. And that's that I'd like to create a shift in the way that we view things. In other words, rather than feeling like we have to be immune to things, the notion of immunity implies that there are things that we need to protect ourselves from that are going to kill us. And we want to be able to become inoculated or just simply immune to that particular kind of thing. And so rather than thinking that we need to continuously be in this protective nature, let's take it to what we really kind of are doing, actually. We're not trying to immune ourselves from things. We're actually in more of a dialogue with things, more of a commune or a community, in a sense, where we're actually participating mostly unconsciously in this world, because if we have 30 to 100 trillion microbiological cells within our body, microbial systems, we're not hearing what's going on there. In fact, one of the cool things that we know now about the microbiology, about bacteria, is they actually have access to a central genetic information pool that they can all tap into. So any one given bacteria can tap into the historical precedent of billions of years of evolutionary processing. And that's why the microbiome is so dynamic and it's so able to protect itself against any sort of dysfunction or things that we wouldn't want in the system. So when it comes down to the evolutionary process of immunity, what we're really talking about then is community. We live in a community of all these different systems and all these different iomes, whether that be the virome or the paragome or all these other systems, the microbiome, the entirety of this underworld process that's going on under our feet, in the air, in our lungs, in our brain, in our entire body, there is microbiology. So much so, in fact, that when it comes down to the genetic information of our body, we have and I don't know the order of magnitude here, but we have something like, say, I probably should have been more prepared with the actual numbers here, but let's just say the number of 20 some odd thousand genetic expressions or genetic variations or genetic possibilities within our body. But when it comes down to all this information that is there are orders of magnitude more because of our microbiome and the way the microbiome informs our genetics to turn things on or off. And the beautiful thing about that is that it's very epigenetic, or it's very environmentally based. Without the environment being considered as part of our body, then our genetics don't function properly. So the epigenetic influences, in other words, the environmental influences, things that are external factors to our body, to this physical body, loosely. There's a meta version of that, and there's also a micro version of that. So there's also epigenetics, like epigenetic cell interfacing and all this other stuff. But the point is that when it comes down to being able to function properly in the world, our environment is just as important as our physical being. And so these epigenetics versus genetic influences, the epigenetic influences of our microbiology, if it's epigenetic to our biology, is phenomenally important. And we live in an age of anti-everything, antibacterial, antiseptic, anti. Well, all that anti is getting rid of life. Antibiotic. That word, antibiotic, it's not life. That's in and of itself a very scary phenomena. Yes, it's, antibiotics, penicillin, and all these types of things have helped to, carry medical, the current medical establishment and the way that we deal with illness and things like that to a whole different level. But like anything, we always, when you're proficient with a hammer, you start, everything starts looking like a nail, or you start looking for nails everywhere when you become, a master of hammerness. Well, we've become a master of killing stuff, on our journey to health. But on that journey to health, we've also forgot the fact that everything is life. And so for whatever reason, we think that if we can just cull or kill the bad guys, leaving space for the good guys, that we find, health. But it's actually not even close to that, because once you start removing these quote unquote bad guys, we don't even, like, for instance, viruses. There's a whole new world happening right now with it, modern right now, 2020, if you're listening to this in 2025, pardon the science, it may have already evolved well from now, but as of now, 2020, we see that viruses are they're almost identical to cellular processes. These little messenger molecules that end up getting excreted from cells, from our own cellular biology, they're bioidentical to viruses. And so there's this thinking pattern that these messengers are releasing. Plants do the same thing. If an oak tree, a mile away is getting, devoured by some beetle, it sends off chemical signatures from its own cellular membranes that tell the other trees in a community to, do a certain thing. Well, in order to protect itself. Well, the same thing happens with us. When our bodies are being, like, when we're more sick than anything, or we've been eating these different chemicals, or we've been doing all this different stuff, or stressors are happening in the ecologies, where our cells are constantly sending out these messenger molecules, signaling all sorts of different information that right now we don't even know how to fully map. So there's all kinds of stuff going on under the surface that gives us this opportunity to connect more fully with our ecologies. And so when we think about, viruses and how they spread, so many of us are eating the same types of foods, we're thinking the same types of thoughts, we're working in the same kinds of environments. We have very, very similar, if not almost bioidentical stressors that are happening all the time. And so, if my body is stressed out to the max, and I'm excreting all these messenger molecules and likely breathing them out, or sweating them out, or in many other ways communicating these signals, other people will be inadvertently picking up on that, and hence the sort of spread of these chemical molecules that are signaling the body then to do certain things genetically or epigenetically to change different variables within our structures and bring us a particular kind of result, whether that's well, the body's going to heat itself up so that it can isolate that molecule, that toxin, that thing that's not working properly for whatever reason, and get it out so that the rest of the body can work functionally, and therefore we get a fever, right, or whatever. Which is the point of heating it all up and putting it out the other end, or sweating it out, or puking it out, or any other out type of scenario. What all of this is trying to get to here is that our microbiology is so fundamentally part of what we are. It's indecipherable from who we are and what we not are. So therefore, we are microbiology, or an extension of it. And there could be also arguments that the vehicle of this human body and most of the other mammals and other things are actually extensions or vehicles within which these microbes have over time evolved into using as homes, as various things. I know it's a bit, maybe a bit out there to think that, we are the living vehicles of these microbial systems, but it's not so strange to think so. It's actually not so far out there to think that that's the case, or even to start to accept that that's part of the model, however loosely. Again, this is slightly speculative, and I'm by no means a scientist, or at least a lab technician who is actively going out there and isolating various different things and looking into that stuff. The challenge with science, as I was proposing before, is that what happens is that we have these living models. Let's just say the human body, that's just so dynamic and so diverse, and we, as scientists, we look in at a particular process or function or bacteria or virus or whatever, and we look at it, but it's so isolated from its natural environment where it's actually functioning. How do we trace the life of a bacteria, from what it's doing to what it's digesting to what what it's expressing versus what's being picked up around it, how they're all expressing within the community? It's a huge, vast community. And frankly, we make things so much more complicated than they have to be. It's just that we've forgotten how to live here. I like to draw this analogy. It's almost like we're all these top-end sports cars, but we've forgotten that we are these top-end sports cars, and we've actually convinced ourselves that we're wheelbarrows. And because we've convinced ourselves that we're wheelbarrows, we've gone out and we've, destroyed all the gas stations, and, we're all sort of sitting on the side of the road, all kind of frustrated. We're not sure why we can't get these vehicles to operate properly, why they're breaking down, why we can't get from point A to point B the way we feel like we're supposed to, but just for whatever reason aren't. It's the same thing in life. What we've been doing to our bodies, to the world, to everything, is because we've forgotten that we are these sort of God vehicles, and we've convinced ourselves that we're just these, fundamentally flawed flesh bags with literally almost no, influence in the world or power or anything like that. And so what we've done is we've burned down our forests, we've, offshooted all of our natural functions of living in conjunction with with biology. If we look at any other life form, none of them have cut themselves off from their environments in any sense, except for maybe to dig a little hole and have a little burrow for when they need to have babies or things like that. There's a direct connection to nature. They're not trying to isolate themselves from things, especially from things like soil or germs or any of these other things that we have in our minds are these bad guys because we've seen these outbreaks of all these different kinds of sicknesses. Those sicknesses and those outbreaks are not because we're germ-ridden, but rather because our consciousness, the paradigm that we hold, doesn't allow for us to build in nature into our systems. And more importantly, keep ourselves clean. We have a very hard time keeping clean. And by clean, I don't mean sanitized. I mean the proper ratios of our biological excretions, feces, urine, sweat, shower stuff, clothing, all this stuff, our food waste, different types of garbage, industrial processing, all this stuff. We don't have a balance of that. Back in a living garden, we've got all sorts of balances in place. When the rabbit takes a dump on the grass knows what to do with that because the soils know what to do with that because the microbes know what to do with that and the fungal layers know what to do with that, and everything it's working in this cycle. But because we've created so much biodensity in these regions that we call towns or cities or even hamlets, without understanding the proper ratios of how soils can and how soils function, how water systems function, how we have to work with the biodiversity of these regions. If we want to have a city that has, 10 million people in it, in a dense, 5-mile radius, then we're going to have to seriously consider understanding how to use our waste properly. Otherwise, what do we find? Condensation, a condensing of very specific types of bacterias, and not even bacteria, very specific types of microbiology that condense in these areas that will overgrow based on the fact that they have nothing that's there to balance those things. And so we think that, killing off everything is the solution. But that's like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping gash. It's silly and stupid, and you'll never stop the core problem, which is the fact that we're experiencing too much density to the ratio of how the earth can take care of our waste. And we need the earth to be taking care of our waste. Coming up with solutions to have sanitation and all these types of things, that's not actually what we need, because when we poop out in the backyard, out in the property, or when we urinate wherever we want to urinate, much like a creature does, our microbiology begins communicating with the earth. And we start to see that the microbial structure begins to grow based on who we are. It begins to create more of a community of what the human biology looks like in the gardens that we're in the forest that we're in the landscape that we're in. And so when we create these sanitation systems that actually cut off the communication from our physical body to the earth, it's not allowing for the biological systems that would naturally grow into the food supply, that would naturally grow into the things that we would eat, that would then inform, that are covered with microbiology, by the way, that comes from the soils, the air, the dirt, the everything that's going on. We then eat that. It informs the system, and then epigenetically shifts some of the information so that it has more of a dynamic functionality. So as the world changes, so thus does the body. It doesn't take billions of years to evolve then in a linear fashion. Genetic changes can happen in as quickly as just a couple of divisions, just a couple of cellular divisions away from the genetic information shifting and changing. It's almost instantaneous. at least insofar as, say, we're not going to say change skin color or something necessarily, but we might change a particular pheromone that we're emitting, or we might change a particular brain chemistry that's happening, or a particular gut chemistry that allows for more happiness hormones or something, or a depletion of cortisol because of how stressed things have been, or other things that are in direct relationship to the vastness of our microbiology. So the whole idea of a commune system versus an immune system, I would say that immunity is more along the paradigm of we have to fight against nature, whereas the commune system is more about, well, we actually need to participate with our ecologies and our environments biodynamically. In other words, we're not trying to cut off the ecosystem from us. We're not trying to cut ourselves off from the ecosystem. And we're trying to come up with actual solutions that contribute to biological diversity. Rather than social distancing, we're actually creating as much social cohesion as we possibly can, in as many ways as we possibly can. Because from there, our genetics, our microbiology, our biology, actual biology, is so much more informed, is so much more wise. It's like the biological equivalent of downloading a whole library's worth of information versus just one book. Your one book is one book within the vast network of information. But when you include the ecology and other one books, rather than distancing oneself, suddenly we have the entire library of life available to us, or at least some proportion of that, versus not having any access to any of it because we're not exchanging biological information, because we're not exchanging that stuff. We do not have to be afraid of the cooties. We need to be afraid of the way we create. Fear is something that we have to eradicate altogether. We need to be conscious of how we create our systems. We need to become conscious of how we integrate ourselves biologically in our world. Literally, go take a dump in your backyard. I know that's like, sanitation networks are going crazy right now, and there are things that we do need to consider. Like, humans are just rife with because of our diets, because of the way we've been, inundated right now, the human gut, most of us have, all sorts of pathogenic bacteria and viruses and parasites and all these other things that are within us, all these tapeworms and all these other worms and all the stuff that you don't want in any kind of imbalanced proportion. So, there may be something that we have to do in order to balance that. And that, again, that's what I'm trying to say, is that we need to come to a place where systemically we're designing ourselves into ecologies, not out of them. Because once we can start designing ourselves into ecologies, suddenly the food supply begins to supply the right kinds of stuff for us to balance those ratios in the gut, so that, we can accommodate for all of these different things and not have to worry about killing them off. There was a study back in 2011 or something, or 2009 or 2011, somewhere in there, where a team of scientists went down to the Amazon and studied the microbiology of deep-seated Amazonian tribes that have never been part of the modern world. And what they realized is that their microbiology is so incredibly diverse. They were carrying diseases that we are like afraid of, things like syphilis and all this other stuff, like that would and like all sorts of different kinds of worms and viruses and stuff that we'd be like, what is this? This is all in here. How is this person even alive? But because of the nature of the way things connect in the gut, they're not killing it off with any kind of stuff. They're born vaginally. They're fed breast milk. They're growing up with all these different plants and animals and things and mushrooms and fungi and all this stuff within the natural systems. They're always in natural sunlight, natural waterways. They're integrated in the system. And because of that integration, the same way that a tree or a chipmunk or a monkey or a bacteria integrates in the system, now so are we. We're not disconnected directly from these systems. They didn't design themselves out of their ecologies. Rather, they've designed themselves wholly in them. And in fact, there was one part of the study where they said that they actually gave them, as a test, various antibiotics. And their body was able to not only defend against those antibiotics, but it didn't kill off as much of the stuff that they thought that it might because of the way that it was integrated. And they were able to recover from the onslaught of this sort of basically gut bomb, like nuclear gut bomb that just blanket bombs the whole bloomin' place in the gut, which is what an antibiotic essentially does. It's just a carpet bomb of death to the microbiome. And there might be a place for that in emergencies and things like that, but we've become increasingly unstable around the usage of these things because, again, going back to the original paradigm, we're not this whole idea of creating immunity through internalizing bioweapons like antibiotics it's effective for certain things, but it's definitely not the approach of connecting to a community. It's not the approach of connecting to our ecologies. It's not the approach of reintegrating ourselves with all of our biomass into the larger ecosystemic whole. That way, the epigenetic information from everything else in this world has the ability to thus then integrate with our own genetic information in a way that is so much more profound and influential and capable of bringing us into now. Bringing us into now with more life and more diversity than anything else we would ever imagine would come from the medical industrial complex or the chemical industrial complex or any of these other places that any of these institutions that we give our power over to and to design into our world. And there's a lot of, people might say, well, what about, if you've ever been on the Gaia network, Gaia.com, and you've listened to, say, Cosmic Disclosure or any of these other sort of very interesting programs that really expand our perspective of who we are as a human race and what we are as a planet on a planet, and what's going on cosmically with things, extraterrestrial life or cosmic cousinry, as it were. The idea, there's two different types of factions. We covered in episode 2 the notion of the Luciferian sort of project, so to speak, this experiment, this sort of spaceship concept versus, the sort of biological concept. What we see with cities, what we see with these systems of invention and technology and all this kind of stuff of whatever, we're kind of seeing a bit of that experiment going on versus the connectivity and all that sort of stuff that we naturally already are as these biological systems. So if we've gone a bit far in the technology space, losing track of what it is that we are biologically. And so if we can, continue what we're doing of whatever we need to do, I don't know what that whole thing is. What I can speak to, however, is the fact that we have this other side of us, this beautiful biological enterprise that is the infinite nature of our beingness. And, things that are coming to the surface now, like nuclear chemistry, for instance, something that we thought was only part of, nuclear bombs or, at the center of suns creating nuclear fission. We're now seeing that this is going on in our own body, in cellular biology. There's nuclear chemistry going on where one molecule is being changed into another molecule through these immense energetic transformations of energy, millions of volts of electricity possibilities and all this really wild stuff going on cellularly, at subatomic levels is completely phenomenal. And like it shows in a sense that we are sort of like transducers that are pulling information from other dimensionality or other light spectrum, other energy spectrum. Like we already know that, the small the small spectrum of light that we see, for example, is just a sliver of the available light spectrum. The audio spectrum is the same thing. What we hear is only a small sliver of the audio spectrum. What we feel is only a small spectrum of the energy system that is available around us. And so we are these physical bodies and these physical brains and all this stuff. We're more like transducers of information that is translating information from ever more subtle spaces dimensionally to this sort of macro experience here, to even more like supra macro experiences in things like, solar bodies and galactic bodies and things like that. So I'm getting a little bit out of perspective here, but the point is that whatever it is that is the reason behind why we've become so isolated from our environments, whether it's because we're experimenting, trying to help other species to understand how to live biodynamically within a technological environment, or whether technology is helping us biologically understand how to live more in dynamics with a technological environment. Whatever is going on here that's outside of our sort of collective dialogue in the media and all this other stuff that keeps us all functioning in a certain paradigm, whatever it is that's going on there is not as relevant as the fact that we are what we are already, regardless of the politics, regardless of what it is that's going on behind the scenes, regardless of what the system would have us act within or as. We are these biological beings, and we have a technological aspect to us. And so because of that, we need to start thinking along those lines. It's not about immunity anymore. It's about community. And the more that we distance ourselves from community, the more immunity becomes invisible. We will no longer be immune to anything. We will become vulnerable through the very act that we think we're becoming invulnerable. So I'm going to cover fear in another episode, because it's going to be the reason why I'm covering community versus immunity before fear is because fear is the number one destabilizer for community immunity, the community immunity matrix. It's the number one destabilization factor over anything else, because fear is what starts to redirect cellular chemistry and nuclear chemistry and all these other things that are going on, because we are actually willful and conscious beings that when we focus energy, when we focus our heart, our mind, and our biology in a specific direction, especially in a resonance of fear, which is basically a resonance of non-understanding, non-alignment, not connecting with the vastness that is our truth of this God vehicle. Again, we're these we're not wheelbarrows, we're high-end Ferraris here. We need to understand this connectivity. And so once we do, and once we stop the sort of reversal of roles, peace is not war. So how could wellness mean war? It doesn't equate. Wellness is not killing off beings. Just like peace is not constantly being out there killing guys trying to cross the border. That's not peace. In the same way that our body requires peace being actual communication and community and diplomacy and understanding and learning and connection and compromise and understanding each other and being able to come to those things systemically. That's what we're talking about when it comes down to the commune system. We need more biodiversity, not less. We need more communication with our environments, not less. We need more integration of our biomass with our ecologies, not less. Because with this direct connection, we suddenly become part of what we're now not really very part of. We suddenly become supported by what now doesn't even know our name. If nature doesn't know your biological or chemical name, how is it supposed to speak to you? How is it supposed to, and by speak to you, I mean, how is it supposed to give you the things that you need microbiologically in order to shift the information going on in your body? And this isn't even talking about food yet. Food is going to be after fear. Because once we fix the mind in fear, we can then fix the food. Because then once we fix the food, we no longer have to turn to a knife. And the knife being, all this cutting and the slicing and the killing and the moving away of all this stuff. Because if we fix the mind and we fix the food, we won't need to have the knife, because the mind and the food are the fix. Because that fixes your own internal, which is your sort of almost direct sense to correct connection to source, God, whatever. And the food is the epigenetic connection to that. So we're getting it both internally as well as externally. And so when the two become one in the one system, there you will find the Godhead. That's where you find the connection. That's where you find community. That's where you find that you won't need anything else. And remember, also, we're not trying to become eternal, like, live forever. There are biological clocks here. It's okay that we only live to 100 years old. If one day we live to 10,000 because that's what the biology can allow us to be, that's fine. I'm not trying to put a cap on what we live, in the argument that, well, we're supposed to be able to live for 1 million years or whatever. Whatever the tenure is that these bodies are designed to live, let it be. It's okay that we go through a cycle of life and death. That's part of life. Life, on the, eternal mother factor, which we covered in episode 1, is paired with eternal life from, the nature of reality. So on the Heavenly Father side, if we talk, again, going back to the Essene representation of what these communions are with life. And so are with existence, are with consciousness, So insofar as being able to, I'm sure this has gone all over the place. I didn't really map this out. This is all coming from, me sort of meta summarizing so many different swaths of information that I've been coming across in these last few years, especially now with the advent of all these really, really interesting understandings in the biological and physics field. We are in an amazing time where if we can come to who and what we are biologically sooner than later, we're going to be in great form. So in summary, I want to keep this quick. It's just myself here today, so we don't really have the sacred feminine with us to bounce ideas off of. But in our own conversations, we do talk about this, and Kim does have some pretty cool perspectives on how to live in conjunction, how to breathe into natural understanding, how to connect more fully with that feeling body, so that we can integrate more with the feelings of nature. We can integrate more with the feelings of an ecosystem. Ecosystems have personalities. We know this. We've come, you go to a new city somewhere or whatever, and you go to a new, natural wonder, and there's this air about it, very different than your own home or your own community. There's personalities energetically to these areas. It has to do with so many different factors, from the biology that's there, the life, the air systems, the water, there's everything, the people that are there. The point is that rather than being so full of this notion that we have to keep on building these blockades, we have enough blockades. We already have so many blockades within our mind, within our heart, and most of them are based on fear, and we'll get into that in the next episode. But in this episode, just get your mind around the idea of commune, the commune system. We are so biologically diverse, and we need biological diversity. With that biological diversity, we become truly suprahuman. We truly surpass our own individual biological natures and evolve into the wondrous natures that we truly are. So I leave you with that. May you feel so blessed, connected, and maybe for the first time in your life, go outside and put your bare feet on the ground and just feel that beautiful energy. Be part of it. Love it. Connect with it. And ask for a little bit more guidance as to what you can do to be a more fully functional part of the community. Many blessings. And as always, remember, allow nature's nurture. Chat soon.